know that we are very privileged indeed to have Professor Bokhari as our speaker this morning. I'm not going to waste any time. He's going to speak to you on political trends, current political trends in the United Nations. I'm going to ask him to go right ahead. Professor Bokhari.
Can I actually hear
Yes.
this? Right at your left.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, in this very brief address, you will concede that I could not possibly give you a comprehensive account of the political trends in the United Nations, even though I had a comprehensive vision of them myself, which I do not have. I will try and put to you 2 or 3 of what I, as an individual, for whatever my view is worth, consider to be important trends. And with your help and cooperation, we might, during the question hour, try to speculate as to what these trends seem to lead to. Well, let me not mince my words. The first important thing that strikes anybody in the United Nations is what is known as the East-West conflict. All television cameras are trained on it, all radio and newspapers concentrate on it. It forms the biggest headlines of newspapers all over the world. All over the world, with certain exceptions to which I shall come later. What does it amount to? From the point of view of the United Nations as an organization, as the only international organization we have. The center of gravity of the United Nations, when it was founded, rested amongst what are known as the Big Five. They were supposed to be the leaders, the guides, the custodians of the principles and the purposes of the Charter. It was they who amongst themselves conceived this organization for certain purposes. Those Big Five were the United Kingdom, the United States, USSR, France, and China. This center of gravity has for a long time been shaken considerably. Because if you look at it, here are these 5 major powers that founded this organization and that was supposed, through their leadership and through their experience and also their international position, to cause the rest of the world to gather around them and form an organization which will obviate the possibilities of major conflicts in the world as far as they can be obviated. It is unfortunate that those 5 big powers today are situated thus. One of them finds itself frequently at loggerheads with the rest, namely the USSR. Another one of them, China, occupies what may, I think, mildly be described as an ambiguous and perhaps infructuous position. Therefore, already this center of gravity is shaken considerably. The spectacle in the United Nations which attracts most attention is not the leadership given to it by the 5 powers that founded the organization, but the spectacle is how to reconcile the conflicting interests and the conflicting standpoints of the Big Five. In other words, the 5 powers that were to lead the other nations of the world are in a position where the other nations of the world are tempted to lead them. This kind of leading them does not succeed. It cannot succeed very much. But the tendency is all the time, what can we do to keep these 5 powers in a position where they can give of their best jointly, concurrently, and individually to the rest of the United Nations? To that question, there is no clear-cut answer. The role of the other nations, not such mighty nations, nations quite young, inexperienced, and not occupying a very important role in the world, nations such as mine. Their function in this respect seems to be one of almost utter frustration. What can we do in order to get these 5 nations to perform the function which rightfully belongs to them because of their position in the international map? Our attempts, such as they may be, I'm not talking of my own country, I'm talking of a large number of other countries. Our attempts, such as may be, is minor maneuvers, minor tactics, all designed to keep them together, because we do not forget that the major purpose of the United Nations, for which it was founded, please read the Charter, was that there should be no major war in the world. The United Nations has been extremely useful and helpful in keeping some of the lower temperatures in the world down. It has, by its good work, by its mediation, by its thoughtfulness, and by the prestige which some of the powers in the United Nations occupies, it has succeeded in a number of small instances in keeping war away and getting on to a course of mediation which might be regarded as a feather in its cap. But as for the major war, the question is, can this organization, founded in order that major wars should become impossible, can it stop a major war? Your answer is as good as mine. We do not know. I think I might repeat here what has been our way of thinking in this matter as to who, how, when, who can stop the war and when. And our answer, generally speaking, is, and I think you will accept it perhaps at first glance, that only those can stop a major world war who are in a position to start one. Others cannot do it. What can my country do to stop a major war? Therefore, the responsibility we feel rests on the major powers. They are the ones that can start a war. They are the ones that can stop it. We would take the future as it comes. If in the meantime we can help, we shall do so. But as I said, the scope for our help is very, very small. In the Disarmament Commission, our position, frankly, deteriorates into one of a frustrated observer. In the Security Council, likewise. The differences are too vast to be bridged in this way. Well, on that question, I would not like to say any more unless it may be during the interrogation hour, if there's anything more that I can say about it. I would pass on to what, to my mind, is the most important trend in the political trend in the United Nations in the moment. A trend marks you which will increase and which needs to be very carefully watched by all students of international affairs. There is a tendency in a greater part of the Western world to think, or rather to behave as though one thought that had Mr. Karl Marx and Mr. Joseph Stalin not been born, everything would be easy. That is not so. I have no doubt that there are certain difficulties and conflicts which have arisen because of the birth and the historical role played by these two gentlemen. But the problems created by their ideology loom so large that a large number of people just too easily think that is the main, the only, the real difficulty in the world. I assure you that that's not so. There are two other sources of difficulties in the world. Two other sources which might lead, can lead, have led to large-scale unrest, to breach of peace, to general deterioration of international security, to a general questioning of international morality. First of all is the economic backwardness of a large number of countries. And secondly is the question which is vaguely designated by the term colonialism. These two questions, to my mind, are far more important in many ways. Let me not give an order of importance. All problems have to be dealt with together. I am not minimizing any other problems. I am merely trying to restore these problems to their proper level if I can. Economic backwardness first. Why is it important? Well, look at the question like this. There are 16 member nations of the United Nations. There may be, well, may be anything from 13 to 20 more within a year or 2 years. But let's confine ourselves to these 60. Amongst these 60 nations is a nation like mine. We strongly believe in the United Nations, in its ideals, and these are not empty words. We regard it as the hope of the world. We who became independent and free about 5 years ago have been, by the situation in the world, catapulted into the membership of the largest international body that the world has ever known. We sit there as an independent and sovereign nation, theoretically, in point of prestige and right, equal to every other. In addition to that, we, if we are a right-thinking nation, if we are an honest, earnest nation, we ought to realize that we have the same responsibility as the others. Of this responsibility, we are fully aware. Now then, here is my nation asked to discharge its responsibility towards the rest of the world on a par with every other, at least in its moral tone and fervor. But having said that, let's now turn to the difficulties. And I choose my nation because I have a right to speak about it, and I'm not entitled to speak about others, but I assure you that I'm choosing my own country merely as an example. There are certainly 20, 30 other countries situated similarly. We have just, most of us, have recently acquired independence after, in some cases, 1 to 2 centuries of foreign domination. What happened during these 2 centuries in countries like America and in Europe? These 2 centuries were the very centuries in which the foundations were laid for what we now look upon as the industrial age in this world. These were the centuries in which new scientific discoveries were exploited technologically for the forming of a new society. This is a society which then people who belong to that society in Europe, and more particularly in America, because of their great enterprise, exploited it fully and became, quite deservedly, some of the strongest, the most well-fed, the most prosperous nation in the world. It was exactly during these 2 centuries or so that most of the countries of which I speak were under foreign domination, with a minimum of progress that was permitted them. So that when these foreign rules terminated, the countries found and the countries emerged into independence, and they were told, now you're free and independent and equal in all respects to the mightiest nations on earth. They found that their standard of living is it is what is left over after it has used all its resources for its own subsistence. When a nation is poor to begin with, its savings are very, very small. That's what a poor nation means, that it uses up all that it produces. Even then it's not very well fed, but it has very few savings. Could it increase its savings? Yes, it could. The USSR, after the revolution, did so. Its people were poor, but it saved. How did it do that? By asking the people to make even more sacrifices. If they were generally starving, to starve just a little more. If they had only one pair of shoes in 3 years, cut it down and have one pair of shoes in 6 years. And likewise with other things. Now, that's a very difficult situation. When people are extremely poor, then any democratic machinery in which everybody has to express their opinion finds it very difficult to act in a drastic manner and ask people to cut down their food from 1 meal a day to 1 meal in 2 days. Such a situation, if one is driven to it, just asks for a dictator. Because only then you begin to say, this is necessary, but how can a parliamentary system in which you present bills, in which you sit down and calculate, in which everybody expresses their opinion, in which the public is taken into confidence, how can all that machinery force a people who are to begin with ignorant, to begin with unhealthy, to begin with poor, to suddenly get this national consciousness and make further sacrifices? And when people think along that, they are tempted to wish for a benign dictator. A benign dictator is everybody's dream. The great man will come who will be so wonderful and so powerful that he'll do everything in a moment and do it well and do it for the good of the people. It is a variation on the Messiah psychology which we all human beings have. Someday somebody will come. That kind of mentality leads to makes room for a dictator. Now, most of us, having been brought up in liberal traditions, cherishing those traditions, somehow fight shy of that. We say, not that, please. Dictators are such unpredictable things. Besides, sometimes some countries have been lucky, they had a dictator who was good and who also disappeared quickly enough. But dictators have a way of perpetuating themselves. They have also a way of becoming nasty at times. They have also a way of getting intoxicated with their own power and become quite beastly. Therefore one, and I'm sure everybody in this room, looks upon that with a certain kind of cautious revulsion. We say, we hope that is not the only way. So we give that up. Think along other lines. There is no other way left after that except an international aid from countries and parts of the world that can afford to do so. Not as charity. On that I've had many discussions with friends. You know, this idea of giving money or aid to other countries, is it charity or is it not charity? Depends. The answer is not a simple one. The answer depends entirely on the stage, the level to which international morality and understanding has attained. I will give an example. When we gradually, in the 17th, 18th century, when most European countries progressed towards democracy, political democracy as we know it, two things happened. First of all, that more and more people got votes. Secondly, people higher up were taxed more than other people. These, I think, two are very obvious things in which you see democracy working. In the beginning, there was just the same resistance. In the beginning, when a rich man was taxed more than a poor man, he always thought that he was being called upon to be charitable for the sake of people who would not work and did not deserve any better. Why should I, the rich man would have said, be taxed in order to help a Bowery bum who does not work and whose morale is low? He should be made to work. And if he doesn't work, he is getting what's coming to him. We do not think along those terms at all now. The world has progressed far enough. People tax the rich unquestioningly. We are supposed, within a democratic system, to adopt the formula from each according to his power, to each according to his needs. And I think anybody, any DuPont, any Rockefeller, who dared to say that the taxes he was paying were charity, would be laughed at. he would in any case be regarded as a feudal anachronism. But we have not reached that stage in the international field yet. We still think that if a great country like America gave away some of its wealth, some of its knowledge, some of its technical information to other countries, the question naturally would be, what do we get for it? The answer is nothing. You merely get a better, a healthier international picture. You get a more organized society. Isn't that worth having? People do not accept that idea readily. Now, to get back to the political trend, this attitude does inform the actions and the behavior of a large number of underdeveloped nations in the United Nations, amongst them my own. Our view is that such a reorganization of the resources of the world is a responsibility of the United Nations and a responsibility of its more powerful members. Naturally, you will see that on that there's bound to be a difference of opinion, and on that there's bound to be conflicts. There are very many of them. The tendency always on our part is that the United Nations should undertake this. Why the United Nations? Because we think the United Nations has no political ends of its own to serve. We would rather that a country X did not give aid to country Y. We would rather that country X put that aid into the United Nations pool in order that country Y should get it. Exactly in the same way as within any given nation, the rich put their taxes into the treasury, which then deals it out as it thinks best for the amelioration of the conditions of the less fortunate in that nation. In other words, this must be done as an international responsibility, and rather than as bilateral alignments with all their implications of political conditions, of political strings, of misunderstandings, and of alliances which may or may not fit into the international general picture. So that if you study the economic and social debates of the United Nations, whether in the General Assembly or in the Economic and Social Council or in all